One of the common themes in your work is the value of grounding science fiction with reality and creating this level of believability with the audience. And these worlds are so far-fetched, but yet your work is always so, you believe it. You really sell it. And
There's a picture on my wall here of me with George Burns in the early 70s. I had the good fortune of working with a great American comedian. And I was talking to him one day about, because George had this way of telling a story that just absolutely drew you in. And boom,
he pulls you along.
That's right. And then he'd pull the rug out or give you something else. And I said, do you have a secret? And he said, yes. He said, Kenny, when you're telling a lie, telling a fiction, when you're telling a lie, you want to put as much truth in it as you can, so that you can get the audience going, oh yeah, okay, I remember, oh yeah, I heard about that, oh, I saw an article about that, and then you just take them a half step further, and they believed you this far, so they're going to go along with you, know, through the rest of that. And
how do you know when you're going too far and what that
top
line is?
Over the top?
I'm sure you got close at many moments.
After I did the 2-hour pilot movie for the Hulk, CBS wanted a second movie so they could sort of get an idea of how it would work as a series. So I wrote a second script, and in the script I wrote, I'm always looking for worthy adversaries, something that would be hard for anybody to fight, even Lou, you know. And so I said, okay, I wrote in a scene where there was a fight with a bear. And I was sending the scripts to Stan Lee out of courtesy. I mean, Stan wasn't having a nitpicky kind of thing at all. Stan wasn't that kind of a guy. But I just wanted to keep him advised of what was going on. So I sent him the script. He called me and said, I love the new script. That's great. I love the fight with a bear. I said, oh, good. He said, but it ought to be a robot bear. I said, no, Stan, no, let me explain. You know. And I told him the George Burns story. And then I said, well, also, there's another thing, too, Stan. An audience will only buy so much. And you got to have a sense of how much will the audience buy. Are they really going to buy this? Because if you're nurturing them along, you got to keep the rules tight and make sure that the audience is buying what you're pitching. And I said, now Stan, we are asking the audience to believe that Bill Bixby metamorphoses into Lou Ferrigno, and that's a really big buy. You know, if we had a robot bear, it's over the top. And he said, but you do the robotic stuff on the Bionic Woman. I said, of course. We're in a robotic world in the Bionic Woman. The bionics are just an extension of robotics, essentially. Sure. You know, so yes, I can believe that there could be a up and walking around robot if I can believe people can have robotic limbs put into them, you know. So we went around and around, and finally Stan called me and said, okay, you know what? I figured it out. You're absolutely right. You know, no robot bear. And I think that it's important to establish the rules of what you're doing. When we were doing the Bionic shows, I'd have a writer come in and say, okay, I'm going to do a scene where Lindsay comes up and she has to turn over this truck. And I said, she can't turn over a truck. And he said, what do you mean, she's bionic? I said, yeah, she's bionic. She can turn over a car, but she can't turn over a truck.
That's over the line.
She's not that strong. You know, she can jump up 2 stories. She can't jump up 3. She can jump down 3, but she can't jump down 4. She'll break herself, you know.
So you create a set of rules that you have to live by.
That's exactly it. So you have to have the rules, and you have to stay with the rules and stay tight. And also I was eager to move the Hulk out of the whole comic book world entirely. I mean, all the stories about, you know, changing Bruce Banner's name, it had to do with Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Peter Parker. You know, I just wanted to get away from that alliteration. So somebody pointed out, so you hire Bill Bixby? You know,
ironic.
Yeah, true. But I was eager to try to keep it as real as I could. Even when we did the Hulk, I did a lot of research into how could this happen. And I got into cellular biology and mitochondria and all of this kind of...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, so much of selling the story is with the medical jargon and the biology and the chemistry and the DNA and adenine, thymine links and solar flare activity.
That's right, all that stuff.
It's incredible, actually, how far you went with the technology and the science behind these characters.
I think it's important because I think, again, the more substantive you can be and the more real you can be, and the more you can see the scientists say this and this and this, and some of them say this, which is totally made up, but it sounds like they could have because the way you
take it a half a step further,
that's right,
and
you set it up. And so that's what we were trying to do always with the Bionic shows and with the Hulk. And also I was really blessed to have such great writer-producers with me on the show. Jim Perriott and the late Nick Correa were extraordinary writers. And it's also where I met Andy Schneider and Diane Froloff, who were not then but are now and have been for a long time married. Andy was my story editor on the Hulk, and he and Diane always claim I gave them their first job. I don't think that's true. I think it was at least maybe their second job, but they were so talented, and with all of them, all of those minds, really creative minds working on it, and minds that were not just trying to make up light fare. We were always looking for substance underneath. I mean, what the Hulk was about, really, was the enemy within. The Hulk was, in Banner's case, he was trying to, it was self-control. He was trying to control this raging spirit, right? And when we were putting the shows together, we'd say, okay, how does the Hulk manifest itself in other people? I mean, with some people, with Banner, the Hulk, his demon was anger, okay? But with somebody else, it was alcohol, or it was drugs, or it was obsession, or it was greed, and we take that as a theme and try to thread that into the story to see, how, and I think that's part of what has given my stuff, all of my work in science fiction and speculative fiction, such a broad audience, because I've always been blessed with the perfect demographics. The largest audience for my work has always been adult women, and on the second layer is adult men, and then teens, and then kids. And the largest audience for all of my stuff has always been female, and it's, I think, not because I've ever pandered to it and tried to say, okay, how can I write so that women will like the show? I just write what feels right to me, and which happens to be focused more on my classical theater training of emotional structure, on the
humanity,
on humanity, absolutely, and the humanism that I mean, the whole Incredible Hulk came about because my wife Susie had given me Les Miserables to read, and as you know, and I had Jean Valjean and The Fugitive and all that wonderful Victor Hugo universe in my head, and that's where the Hulk came from.
How much of your work is inspired by literature? I've heard you talk about Les Miserables, Robert Louis Stevenson, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein.
All of that.
Is that a main source for inspiration?
I think so.
For you?
Yeah, generally it has been, and sometimes by happenstance. You something, you hear about something and it just triggers something in you, and it's so a lot of it has come from that. And certainly when I wrote V, I never could have written V if I had not read War and Peace the year before, because I was so intrigued by how Tolstoy had this whole spectrum of characters who seemed to be all over the place, and very slowly and they were not related or tied into each other, and then slowly in the course of the novel he just does this, and you go, oh, wow, and no wonder it took him all those years to write. But it was just an amazing piece of writing, and so when I set out to do V, I wanted to do an exploration of how a whole spectrum of people would react to sudden intrusion into their lives by this magnificent hyperpower. So it was like, how do you react? How does Danny react? How does every different person react? Because what V was never about big spaceships and reptilian races and all that sort of stuff. It was about power, and how when a hyperpower comes rolling in, some people will instinctively suck up to it and collaborate like the Vichy French did with the Nazis in World War II, while others will sort of play the middle of the road, the go along to get along road, I call it, which is, I'll just keep my head down, I'll just do my job, and maybe they won't bother me. If I'm not Jewish or a scientist or whatever the latest scapegoat is. Of course, in V, I made the scapegoats the scientists as a parallel to what had happened to the Jews in World War II. And then there are the third group of people who are the that say, no, wait a minute, this power is being abused and we have to fight back. And they, of course, become the heroes of the resistance that really say, no, we got to fight back against this and make it happen. What I've been able to do generally is try to find a story where the essence is really important to me and I understand what the underlying substance is. And then I find a way to sort of wrap it in a commercial skin, and I don't say commercial in a cheesy, chintzy kind of way, but in a way that's accessible to a broad audience. And not, as I said, I started to say, I don't target the female audience, but I think that I have drawn such a large female audience to my work because they see that I'm more interested in emotional structure and all of that than in car chases and explosions and stuff like that. Yes, you can have some car chases and explosions, and you can have big spaceships, and you can have a flurry of sparks. That's right. Susie says, my wife says, I could not write a drawing room comedy without a flurry of sparks in there somewhere. It's a joke. It's going to be the title of my memoir, I think, also.
It's a good title.
It is, and it's true. But that way, there's something for everybody. That's, obviously so many young people tuned in when V came on because of the big spaceships and because of the what if nature of the alien race and all. But what it was really about was me getting them into the store so that I could tell them what I wanted to tell them about what's the best way to react to power. Who would you be? When I created the spectrum of people and actors and characters in V, I wanted everybody in the audience to be able to say, I think I'm him.
Somebody for everyone.
I might be her. I hope I wouldn't be that one, but I might be. So that everybody was thought provoking, and that's what I was trying to do in it and spark it, and also to chip away at intolerance and prejudice. That's been one of the recurring things in my life, Jeremy. I was raised in a very, very bigoted, anti-Semitic household, and as an only child. And I heard hate words and racial epithets and the N-word and every other word all the time. And for some reason, I just didn't buy it. It just didn't feel right to me. And so part of my agenda in life has been to try to chip away at that, whenever I could. It's interesting, I've gotten a lot of letters recently in the last few years about the Bionic Woman from people in the LGBT community who said that they really identified with her because she was not the same on the inside as she appeared to be on the outside.
Interesting.
And I thought, wow. I wanted to write a strong woman. I love writing strong female characters, but it had never occurred to me from that perspective, and it's really true. And the peak of that really was when we did Alien Nation. One of my favorite letters of all came from a black doctor in Detroit. When we went on the air, and he said, I saw that this show is coming on air, this Alien Nation, and it really made me angry. He said, what do we need another show about aliens? Why don't they do a show about the black experience? And he said, then I saw your show and realized it was about the black experience. And that's what happened with it. When Fox, my friend Harris Cattleman was running Fox Television, and he called me and said, hey, we've got this movie that did not do very well, feature film, but Kenny, we think there might be a series in it. Would you come take a look at it? And I said, what's the title? He said, Alien Nation. I went, oh, I'm so tired of aliens and stuff like that. I want to do more. I want a more eclectic career, right? So I went over as a friend. I said, okay, I'll come to the and I'm sitting in the screening room, not thinking I'm going to make it through to the end of the movie, because it was really sort of, you probably heard me say this, Miami Vice with cone heads. Is really what, there's 250,000 alien slaves crash land in the Mojave Desert and move into L.A. And one of them over a 5-year period has arisen to be a cop. Okay, so, but it was a buddy cop show with an alien, and he drank sour milk instead of liquor, and they had 2 hearts, and but it was like, I still just couldn't get into it. And I was about to walk out of the screening room and say, Harris, thanks, but I just can't do this. When there was a scene where the alien cop had to wave goodbye to his little family, and there was one shot of this little alien woman and her 2 little alien kids on this sort of ramshackle doorstep, waving goodbye, and the bell went off in my head. I said, oh, wait a minute, who are they? what's it like to be them? What's it like to be Vietnamese in Galveston, Texas in 2000, or black in Detroit in 1950 or 1990, or for that matter. And so I went back to the Fox guys and I said, all right, you think you've got Lethal Weapon with aliens? Yeah. And I said, no, what we've got is In the Heat of the Night. I said, let me do a piece that's about prejudice, about intolerance, about they look different from us, so therefore they must be different from us. Let's do a piece that this really attacks that head on, and this is a show that can go on and on and on, because Prejudice goes on and on and on.
Right.
And they sort of got it, and said, okay, go ahead and try it.
So much of your work, especially the $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and the Incredible Hulk, was about a time and made during a generation where things had to get done so fast. You talked about the garbage disposal, where you had low budgets, where you had very low, if any, technology for visual effects. What do you think your work would have been like, or do you think your work would have been as incredible as it was now, looking back, if you were born in a different era, or if you came up at a different time when you had more high-tech visual effects, more big budgets? I mean, I think so much of what makes your work great is the charm and the humanity and the creative solutions you came up with to overcome some challenges that you just couldn't achieve.
Well, I think that
with what you were given.
You use what you've got at the time.
Right.
I mean, when we did V, there were some shots in V, visual effects shots, that involved a miniature this big. There's one sitting over there on the corner you can take a shot of. Some of our visual effects shots involved motion control, using these spacecraft flying around, and it's a much harder to have a visual effects spacecraft flying around in the real world than it is against a star field. It was a lot easier for George to put it against the black sky with stars than it was to put it in downtown LA. We discovered, but and there were some visual effects shots that we did that lasted maybe 20 seconds and cost maybe $70,000-$80,000 for those 20 seconds. You could do on your cell phone today, and it would look better than what I did then. And I knew it. It was so frustrating, because we were laboring. I mean, was using the same guys that George and Stephen were using. Greg Jean built my miniatures. Greg Jean, who built the Starship Enterprise and the mothership for Close Encounters. I had the A team, working on, and the makeup and the effects people were all Academy Award winners, multiple Academy Award winners. But we were still using rubber masks and stuff like that. And now, you can do Voldemort and take people's noses off and all of that sort of thing. But at the same time, the essence of it is the human drama. I mean, probably the best day, Jeremy, I ever had in my career, one of the very best days, was when the editors and I put together V for the first time, that we had just slapped together in four different editors in 4 different editing rooms, all doing different pieces. And we taped them all together, because in those days you were really literally taping the film together. And we took it into a little screening room 2 at Warner Brothers, tiny little place, and we ran the whole thing of V, and it was just the actors. There was no special effects, there was no sound effects, there was no music, there was even some shots missing and all that. It was just the actors working, and it took your head off, because the drama was so strong and it was so good. And I realized that because of that, all the visual effects and stuff we were going to add on top of it was just going to be icing on the cake.
Yeah.
It was just, they would be bells and whistles.
Yeah.
But the core of it was the human drama, and I think that's what we tried to do, particularly on the Bionic Woman. 6 Mil got a little goofier sometimes, and I wasn't on the show that long. But
there's so many examples, and I'll just mention one really obvious one of the white eyes, the tearing shirt, and then your full-on Hulk, which to me is 100 times better than seeing a full CG metamorphosis without any cutaways. I just think it's more effective. It's much more powerful, and the brain fills in those gaps.
Well, that's it. That's
what you had to do, and you had no choice because of budgets and technology limitations and time, I would argue, is much better than what you would have been able to do, even by today's standards, with infinite potential for effects and budgets.
Yeah, I think a lot of the audience felt the same way. And Ang Lee is a brilliant director, but he just was not a movie for him to do. Well, first of all, nobody should have done the movie. It took them 12 writers.
You should have done it.
Oh, well, I don't. What I would not see. I wouldn't have done it with CGI.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
You can't. for me, it didn't work, and it didn't work. But and the only line, they had like 12 writers on it over like a 10-year period to make this movie, and we were sitting in the theater, and the only time the audience reacted to a line was when he did the one that I wrote as a joke on the show. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry, you know. And after the movie and the lights came up and everybody was trying to sneak out because nobody wanted to talk to anybody about this thing. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But one of the reporters, guy from Variety, grabbed me and said, "Mr. Johnson, don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when I'm Ang Lee." And I went, "Oh my!" Yeah, it was it was pretty deadly. But the you talk about the white eyes thing. What I wanted to have was a trigger effect, so that we knew when we had reached the point of no return. We were shooting at Cal Arts on the pilot, and we'd set up a scene in a laboratory that we were doing, and I had heard from makeup that the contacts had come in. I said, "Why don't you go down and try them on, see how they feel?" And so I was busy doing something. About 10 minutes later, I hear, "Hey, Kenny!" And I turn around, and walking up the hallway toward me is big superstar Bill Bixby. With this big grin and these white eyes. And I said,
That's
"Son of a
spooky.
bitch." I said, "Son of a bitch.
Could you see
this
out of them?
show's a hit." You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could see. Oh, yeah, it was fine. But I mean, they were painful. He hated wearing them. But
They were thick, right?
yeah, they were thick, hard lenses. It was not. It was the old days of contact lenses too. You know? But yeah, and how to get him to expand out of the clothes. I mean, we tried inflatable wetsuits. We tried all kinds of stuff to see what we could do. And finally, I said to Jerry Herron, our great costumer, I said, "You know what, Jerry? Just how about we just weaken the thread, you know, the seam, and you just pull a thread out of the seam, and we'll put a really tight shirt on Lou and let him, you know, pump up." From the comic book, I only took a couple of things, basically. The fact that when he got angry, the metamorphosis occurred. And why he was green, I could never quite figure out. I said, "What is going on, Stan? Is he the jealous Hulk? Is he, you know, green with envy?" I said, "The color of rage should be red." And Stan said, "Yeah, I know. He started out gray, and then the printer said he could do a pretty good green. So I said, okay, let's just go with green." And I said, "Stan, that's not organic." You know, and again, me trying to stay as close to reality as I possibly could. But I liked the idea of a trigger effect, so that when Banner was at a certain level of anger had boiled up, it popped in his eyes. It was not in the comic book, the white eyes. Because it was very creepy to see Bill, you know, turn into this.
And the sound effects.
And the sound effects and the music that Joe did, and the voices that we used, that sort of eerie, ethereal stuff that I borrowed a little bit from Space Odyssey, and you know, and all of those things. And also, the other advantage of it was that by seeing the white eyes, we didn't have to see the whole metamorphosis every time. Once you saw the white eyes, you could throw Bill Bixby into a closet, and we all knew what was going on, you know, and who was going to come out.
He was done for the day.
That's right. And we didn't have to go through, but we, at the same time, we did enjoy trying to figure out new ways to do it. I remember some of the shots we did where Bill was running, and you'd see his feet, and then suddenly it would be Lou's feet, and suddenly the shoes would be burst out, and you know, and all of that sort of stuff.
There was one where he's climbing up a staircase and his hands are
right, exactly, and it
changing.
just changes as you go.
Yeah,
You know, so we tried to find stuff like that, but we could never just sit there on Bill Bixby and have him change. And I mean, even the close-ups we did, where we did them the way that they did the Wolfman in the 1930s. You know, you sit Bill down, you start him with Bill, and then you cut the camera, and you come and put a little makeup on, and you roll a little bit of the camera, and then
it was effective.
And then you just have to do the lap dissolves over it to make him change. But it was.
There was an episode of Child in Need where he's walking down an alleyway changing back, and it's a very dark alleyway, starting out as Lou Ferrigno all the way in the background. And as he walks towards the camera, he gets smaller and smaller, and there's shafts of light that correspond with the dissolves, where you put in a smaller actor. I thought it was brilliant.
It was cool.
It's just so creative, and again, using what you had at your disposal. How can we make this
it's funny
effective?
that you would mention that episode, because that's one of the ones that always people get to talk about, and it was one of the ones that I had to fight tooth and nail with the network, CBS. You know, they said, "This is not a Hulk episode." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's no bad guys." And I said, It's about child abuse. It's about spousal abuse. Of course, there's a bad guy. I said, don't you guys get the parallel that an adult man beating up on a woman or a child is the parallel with the creature beating up on the man? It's like it's a perfect hookup. And they fought me, and I said, listen, guys, I'm going to shoot this. You don't want to air it, don't air it, but I'm shooting it.
Yeah, it was
And Universal
incredible.
stood beside us, and we got won a lot of awards and a lot of humanitarian awards and all because of that, because it was important to try to do stuff that people would make them think a little bit, and what makes a better human being. I mean, that's really
Yeah.
the core of what I was looking for.
So what are you working on now?
Well, we discovered a couple of years ago that I own the motion picture rights to V,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly I had a lot of new best friends. All the major studios wanted to give me a really obscene amount of money to buy the rights and to let me produce, absolutely, maybe let me write. But for a director, they're thinking, maybe they'll bring in Michael Bay or something,
Mhm.
and I said, no thanks. But when you say no in Hollywood, they tend to say, okay, we understand. How much money do you really want? And I said, no, guys, it's not about money. So we pulled it back from the studios because I just was fearful of getting edged out of the director's chair and losing creative control. And we're endeavoring to set it up as an independent picture,
Mm-hmm.
which is, and it's a tall climb because it's a $60 million movie. But I know that there's an audience out there for it.
Huge
The
audience.
V is just so popular still all over the world. And the beauty of V, of course, is that it's a timeless tale. It's really Spartacus and the Revolt of the Slaves, or
Mhm.
the American Revolution, or apartheid, or and certainly the whole Nazi rise to power too. And so clearly, what I've tried to do is to write a screenplay that brings it up full bore into the 21st century. Because when we did the original V, there was no cell phones, there was no internet, there was none of that sort of thing. But the characters were still there, and the story was right. And I didn't want to reimagine it, as people try to do sometimes. It's a dangerous word, and it usually fails, as when they've tried to reimagine the Bionic Woman or reimagine the Hulk. And I
Yep.
didn't want to see V get reimagined
Mhm.
by somebody else. So what I've done is write a screenplay that really takes the essence of all the stuff that made the original miniseries so good, so critically acclaimed, and so popular, but bring it up into the 21st century, and also give myself the opportunity to have something that I didn't have in the 1980s, which was the tools
Mhm.
to make it look the way that I wanted to make it look.
Mhm.
You just couldn't do it then. And now we can, and it can really be spectacular. And I also wrote a sequel novel that picks up the story 20 years later. So V, the movie, would be the first of a trilogy that really takes the whole story full bore and carries it through. Because at the end of the original miniseries, we try to contact an enemy of the visitors, hoping that the enemy of my enemy will be my friend. Right?
Mhm.
And early on in V, the second generation, so when it looks like there's no hope against the visitors, there's a knock at the back door, and people say, "Hi, remember that distress call you sent? We got it, and we're here to help."
Nice.
Or are we? And that's what drives it. So we've got that in works, trying to get the funding together. If you know anybody that can bring $60 million in, you can be an executive producer and get a very nice finder's fee, or even 10 million or 20
How
million.
can people get in touch with you and find you?
Go to my website. You just Google me, and you'll see producer, writer, director, official site, or kennethjohnson.us.
Mhm.
That's my site, and you can find out everything about the book and about the V movie that we're pressing to get done. It's just so incredibly popular and such a
Sure.
no-brainer, But sometimes in Hollywood, there's people with no brains. But in the meantime, I've got a new novel that is coming out in July. It releases in paperback, and also in Kindle, and also in audiobook, and Audible, for downloading. And the audiobook is particularly fun because the novel is told in the first person by about a dozen different voices. So when we did the audiobook, I rounded up
Oh, that's
a
great.
dozen or so of my closest actor friends and said, "Here, let's do a play."
Mhm.
It's called The Man of Legends. It's not an autobiography, and it's a sort of a supernatural mystery that takes place in New York City over New Year's weekend in 2001. But with flashes back over the last 2,000 years to the ancient Holy Land, and then further beyond that into sort of some of the primal images of Paradise Lost. And it's sort of a blend of epic kind of adventure and suspense and a really sweet love story that's all sort of rooted in this great untold legend about this legendary character that people have heard of, but nobody's explored him or who he was until I did this.
Last question. What do you want your legacy to be?
The thing that's most important to me has always been trying to dig into humanity. You know, when I do my film class, I teach seminars in filmmaking, and one of the things I ask the students at the end of the day, because I encourage them to to be the best that they can be and put their heart in their work and all of that sort of thing that you think of.
Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah, Carnegie Tech. Andrew Carnegie's motto was "My heart is in the work." And I carried books with those book covers for 4 years at Carnegie. And it wasn't until, I'm embarrassed to say, I was a senior, Jeremy, that I looked at it one day and said, my heart is in the work. Oh, I get it. If your heart isn't in the work, it won't be the best it can be.
That's right.
So I lay all of those things on my film students, but the last thing I ask them is if any of them know what the word camera means. And most of them don't. And I explained to them that camera is a Latin word. It means room. Camera means room. And it comes from the fact that 350 BC, the Chinese discovered that if you were in a really dark room on a really bright day outside and there's a little pinhole in the wall, the light would come through, and on the opposite wall you'd see an image upside down of what was outside. And a number of painters, including Vermeer and Da Vinci and others, created smaller versions of this to use to help with their artwork. And Kepler, I think the astronomer, finally gave it a name. He called it a camera obscura, which just means dark room. And over the years, people realized, well, what happens if we put a lens here and and a little photosensitive paper? And so the camera was born, and obscura kind of got lost in the ages, but still call them a camera. But what intrigued me about that is the allegory and the metaphor of the fact that when you're working with a camera, you're working in a room. And I tell the students, you got to be very thoughtful about what you bring into the room. What are you going to bring into your room? Because conceivably, you can have a lot of people coming into your room, hundreds, thousands, millions. I've been lucky to have tens of millions of people come into the rooms that I have created. And so I always say to them, okay, what are you going to bring into your room? I mean, you can make a lot of money making movies like Saw, 1, 2, 3, 4, and ugly, mean-spirited, violent, sexist, stuff. Or I urge them to err on the side of thinking more about the humanists of the world, about the Victor Hugos, about the Tolstoys, about the William Wylers, about the Steven Spielbergs, about my particular favorite is Akira Kurosawa, the great Japanese director and such a humanist. And so I always urge them to, when they're thinking about what they're going to bring into their room, to think the way of humanism and to choose wisely.
Kenny, thank you so much. This was a true honor and a pleasure for me, and I also want to just thank you for all your work. It was truly impactful to me in my upbringing and set me on my career path in many ways. So thank you so much for everything you've done.
That's so rewarding to hear, Jeremy. It was my pleasure to be here, and let's just keep up the good work.
Thank you.